It's Friday early evening in Switzerland. It's Space Café Canada time. Our brand new first Space Café Canada by Dr. Jessica West will begin soon. As always, we really appreciate your participation and ongoing feedback. We will learn and improve based on your feedback. I'm Thorsten Kriening, publisher of SpaceWatch.Global. We are a Switzerland-based online platform for information in and about space and new space activities in a geopolitical context. With Dr. Jessica West, senior researcher at the project Ploughshares, we found a great friend and a wonderful host for our outreach in Canada. Earlier this year, I had the wonderful opportunity to have Jessica in one of my 33 minutes formats, and it was amazing. So recordings are still available. I know many of you are already familiar with our website, our bi-weekly and daily newsletters, and the Space Café podcast. We also keep our fan shop open for you online to support us actively to become a Space Watcher. The edition 1 has cool items for you, your friends, and the ones you love, and your support is needed to keep our work alive, and we do that for you. If you have missed any of our previous web talks, we have an archive on our website in the events section and on YouTube. We will host our Space Café Canada live regularly. And with that, my job is done for the moment, and I would like to hand over to your host in Waterloo today. Jessica, over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm so pleased to have the opportunity to host Space Café Canada. I think it's one of many efforts that are taking place lately to raise the profile of space in Canada and of Canada in space, and also to help build our space community. And I really can't think of anyone better to help launch this conversation than my very first guest, Dr. David Kendall, who is joining us today from Victoria on Vancouver Island in British Columbia, Canada's west coast. David really is a remarkable leader in the space community, both here in Canada, but also internationally. He culminated a long career at the Canadian Space Agency as its Director General. He has represented Canada at the United Nations, specifically at the Committee for the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, serving as a delegate and then as Head of Delegation. And finally, between 2016 and 2018, he was chair of that committee. Recently, he has been a founding member of the Outer Space Institute at the University of British Columbia. And throughout all of this, he's been an active member of the International Space University. And I heard he has just been awarded the position of Faculty Emeritus following more than 30 years of service. Congratulations, David. I know that the International Space University has been a defining experience for many in the space community, and you've been a big part of that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jessica. That's very kind of you for that introduction.
Wonderful. So the focus of today's conversation is whether space needs more Canada. But to answer this, we are going to flip it around and start by identifying what Canada brings to space. So let's start with Canada's legacy. David, in your mind, what does Canada bring to outer space? What is our mark on space and on the international community?
Well, I think as most of the international community know, and few Canadians probably, but Canada has I think punched above its weight in space over the time it's been in the business. As most people know, I think probably who are tuning in today, Canada was the third nation to have a nationally built satellite operating in space. It's a little bit different from being the third country in space, but we did have our own satellite. It was launched by the United States in 1962, the famous Alouette 1, to study space weather. We were also a founding member of United Nations COPIUS in 1959, and from then on, I think we've been very active and done some quite remarkable things. Canada is well known for several items or several areas, of course. I suppose space robotics with Canadarm1, Canadarm2 is universally known, even appears on one of our banknotes. We have a very strong astronaut program, remote sensing, of course, through the RadarSat series, RadarSat 1, RadarSat 2, RadarSat Constellation missions. And going back to our founding satellite, I think the space environment, the studies of the space environment throughout the period of since 62 has been a defining part. Space science has been extremely strong, I would say, in Canada, and we have developed some very, very interesting technologies. Of course, also Canada was a member a founding member, effectively, of the International Charter and the COSPAS SARSAT system. So there's a lot of things that Canada has done over during the space era that I think are very impressive.
So if we fast forward to today, in what ways is Canada building on this legacy of being one of those first spacefaring nations, or are we?
I think we are, and I think we'll talk about it a little bit later. You know, we have committed to moving forward in the next big thrust, one might say, of what's happening in space, which is the exploration beyond low Earth orbit, as a founding member, one might say, of the Artemis program, which is, I think, a very positive step. However, and I think, again, I'll talk a little bit more about this later on, but I think that we have lost a little bit of momentum over the past decade, unfortunately. We're not as strong in the sciences as we used to be, developing new technologies. I think we're doing very well in fostering new innovative industry. But again, I think that we have lost a little bit in making sure that those industries succeed in Canada. We have too many of our very good people who are in the small industries which are finding their need to go offshore in order to develop their futures. And as we know, since 75% of the Canadian space of global space business is the commercial side, I think we need to really step up there. So I think there are some weaknesses in what Canada needs to do, and as I will describe, I think, a little later, part of that, or maybe a major part of that, is I would say the support of the Canadian government, which I find currently quite weak with respect to the Canadian space sector. So I'll leave it there, but I will develop those ideas later on.
Excellent. And I think our next conversation, I'm hoping to speak with someone from MDA Canada. So I think you just lobbed me into that next conversation in a few weeks. Thank you. So, David, if we switch from what Canada is doing domestically to looking at what Canada does internationally, I know that you served for many years representing Canada at the UN Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. And I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about the role of this body and of how Canada fits in, what kind of role it tends to play within that international forum.
Well, as I think most of our listeners know, COPIUS is really the only international body out there right now that is looking at the scientific, technical, legal, and policy aspects of space in a multilateral forum. It has, as you know, COPIUS was founded in 1959. Again, just to repeat, Canada was one of the 24 founding members of COPIUS. COPIUS now has 95 member states. It's a huge, huge body. And this year, 2 more states asked to become members, which is good. So it's getting towards 100 member states out of 193 member states of the United Nations. It is a very impressive forum. but it's very stylized, of course, as United Nations is. And there's one of the weaknesses is the way that it's some of the issues that that such a body has to deal with. When I, just as a little bit of an aside, when I stepped down as the chair in 2018, and my final little speech, let's say, to the delegations, I identified 3 areas in which I think really need to be improved very, very strongly, rather urgently with how COPIUS works. One is it's an extremely slow body. Of course, all United Nations bodies are rather slow. They have to be. They're very formal. And as we know, the pace of global space activities, especially within the commercial sector, is such that we really cannot spend 10 years discussing 1 or 2 important aspects before some ideas come forward and some recommendations are made. It really has to find a way to become a lot more efficient, I would say, in the way it works. And that's a very difficult task for the body as it is structured. Secondly, the commercial sector is not represented. The delegations are all State Departments and official government people, and a company, although it can be part of a delegation, is really not the voice of the commercial sector, is not very well heard. COPIUS is trying to find ways to ensure that there is more input from the commercial sector, but I think they haven't been terribly successful yet, and I think there has to be a very strong effort at trying to ensure that those commercial voices are heard in some way, because that is where the future is, and well, the current and future direction of space is going. And the third is that it is, as most people know, there are 2 subcommittees, the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee and the Legal Subcommittee, which work almost independently right now. It's a very siloed process, and that is not helpful, in my opinion, because most of the issues we're talking about have scientific, technical, legal, and policy aspects to them. And if only we were only talking about one of the 2 sides, we're not really getting the full picture, and the recommendations that are coming forward are not fully. Do not fully imply, not impose, but to fully have access to both of all of those aspects. So those 3 items, I think, are quite serious and need to be worked on. Now, going back to your question as what Canada has done, I think Canada has been extremely effective as a state there. I can go back to the early 2000s when Carl Deutsch, a very prominent vice president of the Canadian Space Agency, who's a neighbor of mine on Vancouver Island, was the chair of the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee. And really that's when the discussion of the sustainability aspects started in serious fashion. It took a few years before the working group was established, but Carl was very effective at pushing the ideas of sustainability and the need to consider sustainability. And up to the present day, I mean to say, we have an expert group in the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee dealing with space weather, and that has been extremely ably led by Ian Mann of the University of Alberta for the past 6 years or so. And also there's been a thrust for space and global health, which was led for many, many years by Pascal Michel of the Public Health Agency of Canada. So Canada has been leading in working groups, expert groups for quite a number of years, and I think is seen to be a very active and I would say, strong member of the committee.
Right. And one of the big achievements recently, of course, has been the long-term sustainability guidelines, and that process was really wrapped up under your leadership. Do you have any comments on what they mean, what they don't mean, and what we might learn from that process?
Well, yes, I think that the success of even though it took 10 years or so to generate those 21 guidelines, I think the success of that shows a very positive direction for the committee. It was the 21 guidelines were established and were developed through a working group, of course, led by Peter Martinez, who was a very, very effective chair of that committee. And these guidelines, if you read them carefully, do speak to a number of the issues that we have to deal with. Now, they are non-binding, of course, but since all of the delegations signed on to those, agreed to those, and then they went to the General Assembly for ratification, it means that even though they're non-binding, a state cannot just say, well, I signed it, but I didn't really mean it. They do have a certain weight. And now what we have to do, and what we're attempting to do, is to ensure that there is a process where states can report back and be persuaded, let's say, to start to develop these guidelines and add them to their national legislation, which is where the strength will be. So the COPIUS needs to continue to push the states to ask them how have they developed these guidelines internally, because that's the way they're going to work. Now, fortunately, there was a very strong thrust within COPIUS after once the working group had disbanded, to continue this process. And many states, including Canada, pushed very hard to ensure that there was a continuation of the dialogue, the very positive dialogue between the states, to move forward, to tweak the ones that needed to be tweaked, to add new guidelines. And fortunately, at the meeting just held, that was completed last week, a new working group has been established under Mr. Umama Heswaran of ISRO, of the Indian Space Agency, who's the scientific secretary of ISRO, to develop a mandate and develop a new process to continue with the dialogue on sustainability and sustainability guidelines. And we'll see where that goes. I mean, we're in very early stages. The working group has just been the chair of the working group has just been named, and now we need to, with a mandate to provide the scientific and technical subcommittee with a format, a mandate, and how it's going to work in the next while. I would go back and repeat what I said before, though. This particular working group only reports to the scientific and technical subcommittee. It does not report, and has right now no link to the legal and a legal subcommittee, where legal and policy issues. And as we know, these guidelines that we're dealing with do have legal and policy aspects to them. So we have to find a way to ensure that both of those subcommittees are effectively active in developing guidelines and sustainability issues as we move forward.
But what I can do in the meantime is I can get you one of the questions here from Paul Meyer. Thanks, Paul, for joining us. Said, thanks, David, for your presentation. In your view, how should the government of Canada structure itself to ensure better coherence and coordination of its space-related policies and actions?
Very good question. Something that I was going to talk about a little bit later, but I will bring it up now because I think it's very important. As a bit of background, Canada, like most countries, has gone through a number of series of plans, strategies, policy documents throughout its life. And the latest one, of course, was in 2019, where Canada put together a new strategy document. I just find the title of that document. I think most Canadians know it, or at least Canadian space people know it. But so in 2019, the new Canadian space strategy was called Exploration, Imagination, Innovation. And was not a bad document, but it really spoke very strongly to one thrust, and that thrust was the exploration thrust. The government of Canada committed $2.6 billion of new funds over 20 years for Canada to become a major player, let's say, in the future exploration of the moon, specifically with a robotic system for the new gateway, but also some money for developing some new technologies and science for moon. So this was very positive. But there were a lot of other areas there which are important, I think fundamental to a national space program, which were not addressed, unfortunately, and at least with any budget or any plan. Although a plan was promised, there has not been a plan the government has developed since then. So areas such as the remote sensing, where is Canada going to develop its expertise in the future in remote sensing? How there was a thrust in there in the strategy to improve remote medicine and healthcare. Agriculture was mentioned as an important area where Canada could develop communications. And security, sovereignty. Just looking through this, create, and especially things like creating a modern regulatory framework was mentioned and was as an important aspect of the strategy. But since then, there has been absolutely complete silence from the government. This is over 2 years now. As to how these other elements are going to be developed, how there's going to be consultation with Canadians on developing these, and where the funding is going to come from. So I think that right now Canada is halfway there, is maybe a little bit less than halfway there. We have a strategy, but we don't have a plan as to how to move forward, and that is really holding back, I think, the Canadian program right now.
Thanks, David. And as we have Jessica Jessica back after walking the dog or whatever you have done, all good. I asked David Paul's question about what the government of Canada should restructure itself for better coherence and coordination of the space-related policy and action. So that was his answer, what you can also hear. So, but back to you. So I'm in standby.
Let me just add to that, because I think I have a strong opinion here about the process that Canada needs to go through in order to reorganize itself. And my model here, of course, is the US system, which has a National Space Council, which has just been renewed by the Biden administration. And to me, this is the way that the United States have put this together is really a model which Canada could and should consider. The National Space Council, as one knows, is chaired by the Vice President, and Madam Harris has agreed, and it will chair this new Space Council. As before, under the Trump administration, of course, it was Vice President Pence. It brings together all of the government departments that are required to think about space activities, and just like in space is a very broad area that many government departments have a sort of a finger in, one might say, and it's no different in Canada. I can name 6, 7, 8 departments that use space in a very active way. And the coordination between those departments, I think, is extremely weak. And so Canada really does need to develop a overarching high-level body, excuse me, that reports to the highest level of the government, which in our case would be the cabinet, with ideas and ways forward. After sorry, I've got something in my throat there. After going through a process of consultation with Canadians, it is the way to go forward, and Canada has not done that. And without that highest level of approbation of agreements within government, I think Canada will continue to be, I think, weakly space will continue to be a weak part of the Canadian overall process. So I'll leave it there, and maybe people will have some questions on that. Thank you.
Yeah, we're getting lots of questions. You and I had some things to talk about, so we'll end up pulling apart a lot of the threads of what you've been speaking to along the way. And thanks for jumping in. I think it's not a pandemic Zoom call without a technical glitch, but also the way you guys handled it just showed how collaborative our community is. So thank you. Now, David, I jumped back in and you were talking about Canada's space strategy and its emphasis really and spending on exploration. So I thought we could turn to that in some of your earlier comments about the Artemis Accords. Of course, Canada was one of 8 countries to initially sign on. It's now up to 9. More countries have indicated that they are interested in joining this process with NASA. So I'm wondering if you could speak briefly to this, to Canada's participation and how it fits within our overall strategy and our commitment to multilateralism and COPUS.
Yeah. When the Artemis Accords came out, they came out in a rather, I think, unfortunate way, and which since has been clarified. And the unfortunate nature of the Accords initially was that it seemed to be a totally bilateral process. As we all know, space cannot just work on a bilateral process. We have to have multilateral. We have to have many states and opinions, just as we develop those through the sustainability guidelines. Since they originally came out, I think that there's been a lot of clarification, and I don't think the United States really, thought of these entirely as a bilateral process. And then when they started talking to partners, I think the partners and the 8 partners, the 7 partners, including the United States, that originally signed on, very much, I think, pushed the United States into saying, well, this cannot work this way. It has to be a multilateral process at some level. Frankly, I am very supportive of the United States putting this forward. I mean, somebody has to take a lead somewhere. Somebody has to put something down and saying these are the best practices that we think are necessary in order to move forward beyond low Earth orbit, especially with humans. And if you look at the Artemis Accords and the principles in there, they're very, I think, very germane. They're non-controversial, except for a couple where, of course, a lot of talk has been and a lot of discussions have been made. One, of course, is space resources, and the other is deals with areas of protection, one might say, or I can't remember the way that it's. Sorry?
Safety zones.
Yeah, safety zones, exactly. And those need a lot more discussion. So going back to Canada, I wasn't surprised that Canada was, in fact, I was pleased that Canada was started to engage with the United States and signed on to what is now the defining document, because in there you do see the idea that these, especially in these two areas, there has to be a lot of more open discussion and multilateral discussions, and using COPIUS, for example, as a platform to really expand and bring in other states into the discussion. So that's quite positive. So yes, I think that's good. Again, I will repeat my my previous comment that this is now going to the legal subcommittee, and the legal subcommittee will start to discuss and has a agenda item on space exploration and looking at some of these policy and legal issues. The Scientific and Technical Subcommittee is not shut out exactly, but there is no parallel process within the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee on this. And again, we're dealing with a very complex, multidisciplinary process. So again, if we're going to COPIUS, and it has to go through COPIUS right now, this is where it really has to start to be developed in a cross way. And I hope that Canada will develop and lead in some ways a process which will allow this to be expanded into into both subcommittees and bring its ideas to the table. Now, one of the things that Canada is lacking, and I'll put this forward, is that I don't think that any Canadian company knows what Canada's position, for example, is on space resource extraction. We don't have a policy on that. We don't have a debate on that. And Canada, again, this is why Canada needs to have a high-level forum that is looking at this, and we absolutely need to move forward rapidly with the whole question of modern regulatory frameworks. And even though that was part of the strategy, the government has been totally silent in the 2 years on how it's going to move forward on a modern regulatory framework for space, even though these things are very, very pressing, and Canada needs a position on these aspects.
Right, because we do have little bits and pieces, as you say.
Yes.
The Mining and Minerals Plan names outer space as a future frontier, but does no more than that. Yep. And as you say, responsibility is scattered kind of across the government. I was having a conversation. Someone was asking me, how is space governed in Canada? And you think of one organization, and then all of a sudden another one and another department would come to mind with various responsibilities, and it is quite a whirlwind. Because I think you're leading into my next question quite nicely, which is another broad one, but Canada did just hold a public consultation, or the CSA,
yep,
on asking Canadians, what should our priorities be going forward in space exploration? And did you participate, or what would your input be on that?
Yes, the Outer Space Institute, we did have a think about this, and we did put in a short brief, and effectively our brief is which can be read online at the web on the Outer Space Institute website. Basically, concerns 5 different areas. One is that we urged Canada to continue to strongly promote a multilateral approach to develop rules and best practices concerning space exploration activities. And this seems to have been already partly developed because as the latest Artemis Accords that were signed, again, just to repeat, does mention that that a multilateral process would be is part of their process. But we would like Canada to really push that, because that's the only way forward. Really, we cannot continue to be a bilateral or a agreement amongst just a few like-minded countries. It really has to be a very broad process. Secondly, that we urgently that we ask Canada to urgently pursue a leadership role. We think Canada is an ideal country, given the history in COPUOS, given the history in multilateral discussions, given with other global commons, law of the sea, and various other processes. Canada has landmines and has a great history of developing multilateral agreements on difficult global commons issues. And we believe that that Canada could and should pursue a leadership role in the multilateral diplomacy relating especially to resource exploration, exploitation and utilization. Thirdly, we recommended that just to repeat again, that Canada urgently develops its position with respect to space exploration activities. I don't think that and again, this goes back to the legislation issue, I don't think Canada certainly hasn't publicly expressed how it believes it should move forward with space exploration, and certainly hasn't done a very full consultation, although the Canadian Space Agency's request is the first of that. Fourthly, we'd like Canada to significantly expand its scientific and technological contributions in the ways that help solve everyday challenges for Canadians. The robotic side of Canadarm3 for the Gateway is excellent, but we believe that Canada can add a lot more to exploration, and which could benefit Canada, especially in the area of health, that we have a very strong program in. And lastly, we believe that Canada, as part of this expansion of space exploration, develops a regular call schedule for Canadian-led deep space science missions, while continuing to contribute meaningfully to missions led by other countries. In other words, expand Canada's overall palette of elements that we should be thinking about. And this has been, again, partly developed through the LEAP program, Lunar Exploration Acceleration Program. But we would like to, that's only a 5-year program. We'd like to see that obviously continue, and for Canada to start to develop some serious aspects of exploration, because this is going to be the future of the program of the overall exploration program in looking forward.
Okay, excellent. So I'm not sure, Torsten pitched Paul Meyer's question earlier, which might have been part of my last question on the sort of the lack of strategy that Canada seems to have. Our strategy focuses very much on how we benefit from space, but not necessarily what we're going to bring to it. I think we've been touching on a lot of those issues. So I might ask one more question on both sustainability and governance, and then I want to get to some of the audience questions, because there's so many fantastic ones in there, and I fear that we'll run out of time. But if we go back to sustainability, has sort of been coming up a lot, because that's been a big focus of COPUOS. I know it's a key foundation of the Outer Space Institute is promoting sustainability in space. And we've been talking a lot about governance as well, and COPUOS, but I know that there are probably other avenues for pursuing a leadership role in space governance for Canada beyond COPUOS. So I'm wondering if you had any comments on that before I switch to some of the audience questions that are maybe leaning more to the security side, and STM is also a big theme in the chat.
Yes, well, SDM, SSA, space situational awareness. Again, where is Canada positioning itself inside in these areas? This is the overall, I think, issue that I have. Canada has a successful space program. We have great people. The space agent, Canadian Space Agency, is a tremendous asset that we have. What we're lacking here is the leadership, in my opinion, at the highest level in government in order to define where Canada should move forward. Let me give you a current example, an example that came out today in today's newspaper. Canada has just put out a tender, or is talking about its ice-breaking ships. Canada needs ice-breaking ships, absolutely. You know, we have this amazing longest coastline in the world and undefended areas, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, we need to upgrade our maritime surveillance using icebreakers. We need to have those. But think of this in a space aspect. Canada also needs to be able to have, I think, 24/7 surveillance of its territory. We really don't have that. How could we do that? Well, think about mono-orbit satellites. Mono-orbit satellites could be 2 satellites at the cost of a couple of icebreakers, could be have 24/7 monitoring of Canada and its areas, both with improved communications, remote sensing, et cetera, et cetera. This is the sort of thinking I think that Canada just needs to bring to the table. I think it just needs to think about what Canada needs, and I think Canada needs remote sensing in a very major way, as well as a strong exploration program. And Canada could, with a plan, with a process, really improve on its current situation. But we need that conversation, and we're not having it. That's I think I'll leave there before we get to the questions.
There's a lot of interest in whether or not, and I think I know where the answer is going based on the theme of our discussion today. But is Canada demonstrating leadership on other sustainability issues, on beyond SSA, I guess STM, on debris mitigation, on constellations? Do you see leadership now, or do you see potential for leadership going forward, maybe in another venue?
I see potential for leadership going forward. I think that we're a strong voice at COPUOS, for example, which is the forum on these issues. I don't think that we are that we're necessarily. I think we're held back by the fact that I don't think anybody knows what the government of Canada wants to do in these areas, or what its position is. Once that becomes clear on space debris, on STM, on space resources, on space weather, Canada's going to be really impacted if we have a major solar storm. Really impacted. I don't think we have a plan right now to if half the communication satellites got wiped out and some of the GNSS satellites got wiped out. How would we cope if we don't have so these areas are areas which we are sort of lacking in my opinion. And we just need to step up, and it's not difficult to do so, but there has to be leadership from the top saying this is a priority inside the space exploration strategy. There's this wonderful phrase that Canada's space program is a, let's get the words right, is a strategic national asset. That's right. What does that mean? To me, it means that this is something which the government should be absolutely jumping all over, because it's vital to the country. We know it's vital to the country. We know if we lost space assets, we know if we lost communications and GNSS systems and remote sensing systems, we would be in a lot of trouble. But so it is a national asset. What are we doing about it?
What I like about this conversation is it's also pointing to the fact that you said within space there's often silos, but space is also often siloed as a very niche topic and capability. But what we're discussing today is really how it's linked to Arctic development, security, environmental security,
fishing,
forestry, fishing, all of the remote sensing that we do, our electricity. It's really critical infrastructure. And I know we're not the only ones struggling with this. I was just having chats yesterday with colleagues in the United States following the hearing on norms and whether or not space is critical infrastructure. And that's another question I think we haven't grappled with. And yet you're prodding me to be thinking that this needs attention, that we're not giving it. So I do want to have a chance to get to, there's just so many wonderful questions in the chat. Do you mind if we switch gears to the chat?
Absolutely fine.
Okay. I've had a lot of people, I know a lot of people are interested in your perspective on the process to develop norms in outer space related specifically to security activities. Given your experience really helping to navigate that very long process and copious on the sustainability and safety side, and what your take is on the process, on the resolution, on where it might go, or where Canada might take it.
Well, thank you for the question, because it is a very interesting one, an important one, because what we have here, in my opinion, is starting to say, okay, the current structure of COPIUS in the UN, of COPIUS and with the Conference on Disarmament, which works by consensus. And as we know, consensus is wonderful when you have people and nations that agree on ideas, and is not that effective when you have disagreements, major disagreements, and it could not even, it's not necessarily in the space realm, it could be somewhere else. Geopolitics always plays a role here. So now we have this resolution put forward by the UK, and kudos to the UK for putting this forward. Really, I think it's a very I'm talking about the resolution adopted reducing space threats through norms, rules, and principles of responsible behaviors that in December of 2020 at the UN, which was passed, 164 states voted for it. I'm not a security expert, so I'm not going to go into this in any detail, but I am persuaded by my good friend John Logston's comments on this that he recently wrote in American Ambassadors Live. I thought this was an excellent piece by John, that we now have a process where the United States specifically needs to step up, and the Biden administration specifically needs to step up and to develop some basically has an opening here to start to show leadership, because I think that if we're going to deal with security aspects, it has to come from the leaders. It cannot come from people like me. It cannot come from, from senior bureaucrats. It has to come from political leaders. We're talking here about discussing these issues at G7s, at G10s, at G20s. We're talking about this being on the agenda, and to have serious and substantive discussions at these types of forums, because that's where we're going to see any resolution, any way forward. Without that, without the leaders themselves, you go back to the Outer Space Treaty of '67. At that time, it was, as we know, and John again has written extensively about this. This was a priority of the president of the United States and the leader of the Soviet Union. They wanted this to happen, and until we get this, these whole issues about security I think will just continue to not be terribly effective. So yes, we have this resolution. This resolution was, I think, excellently written. It is a step forward. It's not a major step. Well, it is a major step, but it's not saying that these are the rules we need to follow. It's saying let's start the discussion. I think that's excellent, and let's see if the leaders can start to take note of this and to move forward.
Yeah, I appreciate the collaborative nature, I suppose, of the discussion, and I think the amount of input that has been collected so far is promising, and hopefully might have one or two ideas that states can maybe agree to work on, no matter how small, and build. I know a good Marco Alberti from Italy and from SB had been asking earlier in the chat too about the role of cooperation in space, international cooperation. And of course, Canada, we're a small space country, and cooperation is really key to how we work. And it's in the news a lot because of lack of cooperation between some spacefaring states and China, who's really doing a lot lately with the launch of the new space station, opening up participation to members of COPUOS. So do you see promise or avenues for Canada to expand cooperation beyond really core allies and partners that it currently works with?
I hope so. We will see. We have in the past worked very collaboratively. Our program has been based on collaboration, and let's put it that way. We have a small budget, a relatively small budget, and although we've done a few interesting things on our own with the robotics and with the radar sats and with some science experiments that we put up, basically we will be working with partners. Canada has been a collaborative partner with the European Space Agency for 40 years. It's remarkable partnership, and we still partner strongly with the European Space Agency. Of course, our major partner has always been NASA, and I think will continue to be NASA. We've worked with the Japanese Space Agency on several, as well as on the International Space Station, of course, with science satellites and science missions. We've worked with the Indians, ISRO, on some science missions. I see these collaborations as fundamental to where Canada needs to go, and this is again one of my beefs about the current Canadian program. In that we have not. To me, Canada's space program needs a number of very high-level, large initiatives. The radar sats, especially the robotics. It also needs at the bottom a number of studies that look at the future potential for science, for technology, etc. And I think on those two levels, Canada does well. It's the middle one where we then need to develop instrumentation, need to develop collaborations with countries that we have, I think, let the ball down a bit in the past decade. All of the things that we crow about, all of the scientific successes we have, they're over 10 years old. And we have very few new initiatives on the books with our partners to develop instrumentation and to develop the scientific expertise, to train the technologists, to train the engineers, to train the scientists. And so we need to step up that international collaboration in my mind.
I did lose some of the earlier questions, so I'm gonna, my technical glitch, I'll skip down, but I think leading on that point about collaboration, but also technical know-how and skills. Someone has been asking about planetary defense, and that also, I think, ties into some of the copious issues. But any comments on where that is going? Is that a promising area of collaboration, or do you see more governance happening on that topic?
Well, yeah, planetary defense, of course, has two aspects, which there's two bodies out there. The international, what is it?
Should we clarify? We mean the asteroids, right?
Asteroids, yes,
Just
yes,
in case
yes.
some people might not understand.
Yeah, sorry.
I should have made that clear in my question.
Space Mission Planning Advisory Group is an important group that's been put forward. This has come out of COPIUS, which is a positive thing about COPIUS, and the International Observation Network, which is also a part of that. Now, Canada has a satellite in space, NEOSat, which is looking at a very small satellite, very interesting satellite, which is looking quite close to the sun to look at incoming objects from the sun. And we have a very strong scientific group in Canada looking at meteor and asteroid research. We need to, again, I think it's one of those areas where Canada has been very successful, but that group is being a little bit starved right now. I think here's an area where Canada could, with small satellite technologies, with some of the expertise that we have in universities and in our industries, we could bring a lot to the table there. And so I know that Canada did pull out of, not actually pull out of, but decided not to fully commit to the Space Mission Planning Advisory Group, for example, in the past. And I think that we need to re-engage with those bodies in order to move this planetary defense forward. So yes, I think that Canada has a lot to offer, should be offering some new ideas in this area.
Great, and I'm gonna go to another current event, because I was thinking about how you say there's not often resources for a lot of these things, and when it comes to asteroids, I find that a lot of newspapers like to put all capital letters, the Telegraph in particular, close call, and I'm like, do we need to start yelling more in our headlines to draw attention to some of these issues? But of course, this week the headline has been dominated by the reentry of China's rocket and some of the hazards that it could potentially pose, and whether or not a best practice was followed. And do you think that this type of activity, as we become more active in space, will drive additional cooperation on safety, or do we already have this measure in place and it's not working? I mean, I guess I'm curious what it says about our governance processes and our ability to really commit to those sustainability and safety principles that I think are really near and dear to the hearts of many in the space community.
Yeah, I think that this is a very interesting issue, because, as Jonathan McDowell quite rightly pointed out, this is the first time I think an object over 10 tons has re-entered into the Earth's atmosphere without any plan as to where it's going to land. And this is unacceptable. Let's be blunt about this. This is unacceptable. Yes, the chances of it landing on an inhabited area is small, very small, but the risk is there, and you don't just do this sort of thing if you're sort of committed to sustainability, and not sustainability, but to best practices in space. So I think that just like you don't blow up satellites using ASATs, these are areas which are unacceptable, and they need to be called out. It's as simple as that. There's nothing illegal about it. But again, I think that a country like Canada needs to have a strong opinion on this. You do not have active ASAT, kinetic ASAT tests. You do not bring big objects back down through the space, through the atmosphere, and that have the potential of destroying something or somebody. It is unacceptable, and I think that is an area where governance and best practices need to be have some teeth to them. How we get there is, of course, the big issue.
Well, and especially with states promoting this type of approach to governance, the norms, the best practices, the calling out, we're not seeing a lot of it. We're seeing a lot from civil society, from commercial, from researchers, universities. We're not really seeing a lot of states going on the record to really reinforce and nail down, here's what we expect. We want to do better. We want to see better. And we will do better ourselves and communicate that to the world when we, in turn, are doing our activities.
And Canada has to have a national legislation which forbids any Canadian company or government agency from doing this. Right now, we don't have that legislation. Again, going back to why it's so important to have national legislation and rules that we follow and that we can show we follow in order national legislation that forbids these types of practices.
Well, I'll give you one last quick word on what you think the key principles or strategies going forward for Canada could be, and then we're going to hand it over to Torsten to wrap us up, let us know what's coming up next, and say goodbye in his eloquent way that he always does.
Well, okay, to sum up what I think I'm trying to say here is that Canada has a great legacy and history in space. I think we're considered to be a strong partner in space activities. I think we've shown leadership in the past. I think we need to show leadership, even stronger leadership in the future. But to do that, we need to have the government of Canada to come out and to really put teeth into the fact that space is a strategic national asset and a plan as to how we're going to move forward. And unfortunately, those areas are not right now on the radar as far as I'm concerned. There are reasons for this. We have gone through a horrendous pandemic, which is still ravaging parts of the country. So, you know, there are reasons, but it would be good to have some word from the government that this is on their radar and that they have a plan. And I fortunately don't see that right now, and I'd love to see it being developed in the near future.
I think that's a great point, and I have been taking notes, even though this will be recorded, and I will follow up, I think, by sending the recording to my MP. And some food for that in a really accessible, conversational way and non-confrontational. Because there's a lot of good points there, and it leaves us with a lot to explore, I think, in further conversations with Space Café Canada. So thank you so much for that, and I do want to hand the platform back to our dear friend Torsten.
And let me say thank you, Jessica. You are an amazing moderator, and it's been a great pleasure and privilege to have been on Space Café this time.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. I'm speechless, so to say. Even so, I didn't have an active role here, but it was wonderful to hear your words, and I'm very impressed what's going on or what's not going on in Canada. I think that's always the bridge. Exciting times are also for us for the next weeks. Even so, we have to say the next 2 weeks we are slowing down a bit. Just one Space Café a week. What is a slowdown? So next week I will have the pleasure to talk with Laura Forsyth about human spaceflight, commercial human spaceflight. I think very important these days. A week later with Catherine Courtney from UK about how we prevent us to go to the next catastrophe. So in terms of education in STEM and sustainability. So from a UK perspective, and especially with the resolution, are an interesting topic to discuss with her. Then the same week we start our first Space Café UK with Ian Jones from Goonhilly Earth Station as the first guest. And on the 25th of May, I have the great pleasure to have my 33 minutes talk with Will Marshall from Planet about the European Green Deal, something at least pretty important for us here on the old continent. So, and then in the same week on the 27th, and that's something I'm really looking forward to in the early morning. So I know it's very, very uncomfortable timing for Canada or for the US. I mean, at least for Pacific time, it's just half hour after midnight. So, but it's made for the Asian side. The next space law breakfast with Stephen Freeland comes up, and our wonderful guest this time is the Dream Team. It's Jenny Tapio and Alex Suchek. I mean, how could we do better? The same week we will start another Space Cafe Balkan and our first Space Cafe Spain as well, in Spanish language, of course, because we can, and we have a great network there as well. All events are on Eventbrite or will be on Eventbrite, and as always, we are looking forward to hear your feedback, so please check in with us on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, send us a pigeon or a love letter. It's also fine. So we take everything what we can get to make our shows better for you. Don't forget to sign up to our daily or bi-weekly newsletter of SpaceWatch.Global, and if you like to treat yourself with something very special, become a Space Watcher. It's so irritating when you see yourself in the camera or on the screen. So, but become a Space Watcher today. Your support will help us. Take your credit card and visit our fan shop at shop.spacewatch.global. I know I repeat myself, but we do need your help. Thank you very much for your interest today, and thank you, Jessica, for your debut here on our Space Cafe as a host. And David, what a great pleasure to listen to your inspiring talk and being our guest. I can't thank to the entire team today because I was a team in the production. So, but I think we managed that. I hope you all will stay safe and healthy. And thanks for joining us. I hope to see you next week. In the meantime, visit our website, follow us on social media. Have a wonderful weekend, but don't forget, become a Space Watcher. Thank you very much.